My best friend in the whole world is accusing me of sleeping with her husband. I'm talking about a best friend for decades. I would never do something like this, ever. And you know what? The fact that she doesn't believe me, it actually makes me really mad. But I do know a secret about her. A secret that I swore I would never in a million years confess, but I think I'm getting drawn to the point where I have to tell the secret just to get her off my back. Maybe I'm making a giant mistake, but I guess we're about to find out. Every other week since we were in high school, my childhood best friend Priscilla and I have had a brunch and then visited the cemetery together. Our friend Rachel, whom each of us had considered a sister, she passed away in an accident the weekend after our high school graduation. You see, losing her is one of the worst things I've ever experienced, and as horrible as it may sound, it might be the only reason that Priscilla and I are still friends. Barring emergencies or special circumstances, visiting Rachel, her grave together, it's a tradition that we've never broken. We each met Rachel separately as children, and she was the glue that held our little trio together. While we weren't as close to each other as we were to Rachel, no one else understood the grief that we were feeling in the same way. So, for months after the funeral, I saw Priscilla every day. And more often than not, the day took us to the cemetery to talk to Rachel. As creepy as it may sound, it became our thing. We kept the tradition up by visiting Rachel every other weekend through college, and eventually we both graduated and surprisingly ended up staying in town. I don't know if subconsciously neither of us wanted to give up seeing Rachel, but whatever the reason was, we stuck around. The visits evolved into the bi-weekly brunch and cemetery things that we have going on now, somewhere along the way. Living back in our hometown just brought us back together after college spent so much time from us apart. Well, aside from the weekends, despite the fact that we would obviously grow into very different people. Thinking on it now, I don't know if things genuinely fell back into place or if we just forced it to. In any case, not long after we came home from college, Priscilla met the man who would become her husband. To say it was love at first sight would be a gross overstatement. Priscilla did not like Richard from the moment that she met him. What she did, however, was his wallet. This isn't me being rude or presumptive. She told me time and time again that she's only with him for his money, as she finds him to be boring and plain for her taste. Having known the kind of guy she dated in high school and college, Richard is definitely a lot calmer in comparison. Given everything that she's told me about him, I was actually kind of hesitant to meet him. However, he ended up being perfectly normal. Calm for sure, but not more so than any other guy that you could pluck off the street. I think Priscilla eventually realized this too, because they ended up getting married and welcomed the first and only child not long after. See, I was the maid of honor at the wedding, just as Priscilla would be at my wedding a few years later, when I married my own husband, and since then we've kept up our tradition, and though every other aspect of our lives have drifted further and further apart from each other, we've kept that connection going. This past weekend was a Rachel weekend. Priscilla texted me the day before and just let me know that she would have to skip out on brunch to run some last-minute errands for her mother, but she would meet me at the cemetery right after. This wasn't altogether unusual, though we tried not to let anything get in the way of our Rachel weekends. We both silently agreed that if we had to cancel something, it would be brunch. So I drove over to the cemetery a little earlier, thinking that I would spend some time getting it cleaned up before Priscilla arrived. But I was shocked to find her there already. She was sitting at Rachel's gravestone, knelt in front of a little gift box, and just absolutely sobbing. So, naturally, I rushed towards her immediately. Sure, both of us had our emotional moments with Rachel from, time to time, but never had I arrived to find her broke down to this level before. At all. It was bad. So I immediately thought the worst. Maybe something had happened with her mom. Maybe something was seriously wrong. So the moment I got close to her and called out to her,
However, she sprung up away from me, yelling for me to get away, get away. Obviously, I was shocked and confused. I asked her, what's going on? But all she did was ask me, how could you? Again and again, and every time I tried to speak. Finally, I raised my voice and asked her, what on earth was she going on and on about, and she finally stayed silent long enough to pick up the gift box that she's been sitting on in front and throw it at me, asking me if I was proud of sleeping with her husband. Okay, before I go any further, what happened, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. I did not sleep with Richard. I've never even flirted with him, and I'm a happily married person to my own husband, whom I would never even dream of cheating on in a million years. This is not even, taking into account the fact that I would not do something like that to another woman, let alone one that I've called my best friend for the last 2.5, decades? Of course, I told her as much, but she told me that I couldn't fool her. That she knew something was up in the last few months, but finding the gift was the last straw. That just proved it to her. So, guys, for context, I've spent a few months helping Richard refurbish and renovate his grandparents' farm. You see, why am I doing that? Well, I'm an architect, and his wife's best friend. There's nothing weird about it. We barely even spend the time together, considering our paths only really cross when there's being talked about discussions of decisions. Otherwise, I just deal with the crew, and he occasionally comes by the site to check on the progress. Considering he's the husband of my best friend, I'm not charging him a cent for the project. Well, he's thanked me for it loads of times already, but apparently he'd now gotten me a gift. Inside the box that Priscilla threw at me was a watch. Nothing expensive or valuable, more of a pretty trinket. Something I very openly collect. I mean, if the Instagram account I have showcasing my collection of vintage watches with unique wrist straps is anything to go by, for all intents and purposes, this isn't some damning, intimate gift between lovers. It's an appreciation gift for a friend. Priscilla was willing to listen to absolutely none of it. She was convinced that Richard and I have been seeing each other behind her back, and that refurbishing of her grandparents' farm was just a cover-up story for us to meet up. She accused me of sleeping with her husband and called me a nasty collection of names in the middle of the thankfully empty cemetery for what felt like forever before storming off back to her car, and telling me that if I followed her, she would run me off the road. As she walked away, she told me that she had always wished that I was the one that died instead of Rachel. It's been about a day and a half, and every call and text have been unanswered, and I don't even want to think about contacting Richard about all of this. I've obviously already spoken to my own husband, and he's 100% believing of me that nothing happened between me and Richie. I just don't know what to do. We've always butted heads a little, but we've never had a fight like this before. Part of our lives being so separated meant that there hasn't really been that much for us to fight about. While I feel like we've been growing apart for the years now, I think I've been hoping to help Richard. It could be the first step to Priscilla and me actually connecting for once, over something that did not involve Rachel. Should I just keep calling and texting her and hoping that she answers? Should I try and ask Richard for help, or do you think that would just make things worse? I really need some answers, and I don't know where I can find them. If you have some advice, I would really like to, take anything at this point. It would be so much appreciated. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. So it looks like we have two best friends in a pretty heated argument about one of them sleeping with the husband. I do want to check out a couple comments before we hop into the first update. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing for daily videos, and here is the first comment. Okay, I've read through a couple of the other reactions to this post, and all I can say is that some people are insane. I don't know how you can read anything that OP has written and come away thinking that she's somehow the bad guy in all this. Taking everything OP said at face value, which I'm going to do because imagining that OP is some, karma-framing mastermind, just lying about, well, not cheating with her best friend's husband is a bit over my pay grade. She's done nothing wrong in my eyes. There isn't a lot written about the project you're helping her husband with, but I don't think that in itself is a marker of guilt. But on to what you actually asked for, right? Honestly, I wouldn't even want to salvage a friendship like this if you can even consider it that. She sounds toxic, unreasonable. Really, OP, just move on. Comment number 2 by 1200 Mailmen says, if there's one thing I've learned from all the years I've spent on God's green earth, it's that you should never, and I mean never, mess with another man's husband, and I understand that some of the other comments have chosen to believe everything you said, point blank, but, having some experience with girls like you, I read between lines, enough to see that you think Priscilla doesn't deserve Richie, and that maybe you think you do. You barely say 2 words about your husband, who you don't even name through the post, but we get more than enough information about Richard. You claim to not be so close to Priscilla, but clearly, you're close enough to offer your services to Richard free of charge. By your own admission, he's not hurting for money, so why go out of your way to do him a favor for free? That will have you spending hours of your time in his company? Come on, girl. Update number 1. Before I get into anything else, I want to thank the people who took the time just to respond to my original post with genuine, caring answers and advice given from one human being to another. I really appreciate all of you who took the time out of your days and responded to me as though I was a human being worthy of respect. Well, anyways, that aside, I want to ask what on earth those of you who felt the need to leave me nasty comments and messages gained from doing so. I've already told you I didn't do what Priscilla accused me of. If you don't believe me, I didn't do anything to change that. But it also doesn't affect you in any way. Why go out of your way to make somebody feel worse about an already crappy situation? For those who left comments asking genuine questions, I'll provide as much clarification as I can. Some of you asked why Richard, who by the way I don't claim to be close to in any way in my original post, would want to get me a gift and why I wouldn't charge him for my services in the first place. A few years ago, Richard helped out my cousin with a lawsuit against a semi-prominent businessman in the area. My cousin was in a real bind, and Richard helped him out and did not charge him a single penny for everything that he did. He did this because, well, though we've never been close particularly, I am his wife's best friend and because he's a genuinely good person. Despite the fact, and Richard did not charge him. My cousin and I decided to give him a gift to show our appreciation. We got him a personalized golf bag that he still uses to this day. So, when Richard asked for help with his grandparents' farm, I agreed to help and insisted on not charging him a thing. He'd help out my family so I could help out his, and I make more than enough from my other projects that I could afford not to charge him. So I didn't. The gift of the watch, which I didn't even know he was going to give me, is likely just his way of reciprocating too. There's nothing more to it, guys. We're not having some clandestine affair. We're friends returning a favor. Ugh, nothing more. Priscilla was more than aware of Richard helping my cousin out and the golf bag gift, so I really don't understand why she's chosen to blow this out of proportion. Though, she's remained uncontactable since the incident at the cemetery 3 days ago. I've heard from a couple of mutual friends that she has remained silent. Apparently, she confided in a few of our friends and told them what she thinks, guys. Well, given the fact that some of those friends have been friends with me since high school and earlier, they reached out to me immediately just to straighten things out. I haven't been able to actually go out and address any of this in person yet, since between work and both my husband and daughters being sick, I haven't had much time to myself, but thankfully I have some good friends who are defending me in my absence. According to them, Priscilla's refusing to listen to any reason, and claiming that she's always known that I was a cheating, slur, which is ironic to say the least considering what I know about her history. So I'll likely update this again once everything is sorted out. But for now, guys, I just need some space to vent while the girls and my husband are both asleep. Hopefully this whole situation resolves itself soon, and I'll be able to move on with my life. Update number 2. I honestly believe that I've been handling this whole situation in good faith, but I now, more than ever, believe that I'm only one that has done so, as Priscilla has clearly been playing any and every card she has to try to make this as bad for me as possible. You see, as I've already stated, I've been working with Richard to restore his old family farm. I've held off on contacting him for the last week just to give the whole situation some time to cool off and to avoid making anything worse than it already is. I don't know how informed or in the dark Richard is about everything his wife has accused me of, but I didn't think that this would affect our business relationship, considering the accusations aren't true and because he hasn't contacted me in any way to indicate as much. Unfortunately, I clearly misread the situation, because today, when I arrived at the farm for a scheduled demolition of one of the old barns, along with my crew, of course, Richard was nowhere to be found to let us onto the property. I tried to contact him and then Priscilla, but clearly I've been blocked by both of them. Now, this would be something that I would unpack myself in my own time and any other situation, but when it affects the crew of people I source to work on the project, who only get paid by Richard for the hours that they spend working, I get a little tired of it. Well, I sent the entire crew home and drove straight down to Priscilla's house only to find nobody there. Convenient, huh? So I call Angie, one of the mutual friends who had told me about the rumors Priscilla's been spreading about me, and asked if she had heard from her recently. Well, get this. They had left that morning for a trip across the country to visit some family, the same morning that we had a demolition scheduled on the farm, without having the courtesy to inform me or any of my crew about their plans. Angie told me that Priscilla said that they needed some time away from me. What? Because I was such a, immoral person that she could not relax just knowing that I was in the same town as her husband. So, in my last update, I mentioned that it was ironic that Priscilla was accusing me of being a cheater, and I'll tell you exactly why, guys. At our 5-year high school reunion, held at the little resort out of town, Priscilla and I shared a hotel room paid for by her loving husband, Richard. Wouldn't you know, Priscilla didn't spend a single night in that room, instead choosing to reconnect with her high school sweetheart, Ethan. Yep, that's right. Well, I was disgusted with her behavior, but she spent the entire drive back to town sobbing about how much she regretted what she did, how she just wanted to feel wanted again, and that Richard was cold and unfeeling, and that if he ever found out, oh boy, that prenup she signed would leave her out on the streets without 2 cents to rub together. Yeah, she just had a kid 2 months ago, guys. No matter how disgusted I was by her actions, I just couldn't let her be tossed out onto the streets with a child that young, so I didn't say a word. Well, it's been 10 years since that reunion, and I've kept that secret every single day. I've never even hinted at her. I've never even told Rachel, and now she's decided to turn around and throw untrue accusations at me over something that she's done before. Something that I more than express my disapproval for. I'm starting to think that the only way to end this is to fight fire with fire. Well, obviously, right? I can't just ask anybody for advice about this, so please tell me, what do I do? Is going nuclear my only option? Update number 3. Hey guys, this won't be a very long update at all. I'm seething with anger, and I know without a shadow of a doubt that the answer to the question I posted at the end of my last update is answered. Going nuclear is absolutely the only way to deal with this. At least if it's the only way to end in this way that Priscilla deserves. So, to let you guys in on what's flipped me so quickly from hesitating and being unsure to the point of views that I hold now, allow me to introduce my husband, Hudson. I met Hudson a few years after settling back into town after college. He's been an electrician for years when I hired him for help, and, well, with some work I was doing in my parents' place, there was an instant connection. I didn't know then that I would end up marrying him. But I could sense immediately that I had just met somebody who would be extremely important to me. Today, we're happily married with 2 gorgeous girls under 5, and Hudson's currently a stay-at-home father until they're both old enough to be attending school. It's something that we both agreed upon, and my income is more than enough to support our family. So this arrangement works for us, and I love him. And I love the fact that our daughter gets to spend every day with him instead of being cooped up in some daycare. Priscilla knows this, and I've never been one to speak ill of my partner outside of home, regardless of how upset I might be in the moment. My parents never did, and I adored the fact that they were always on a team. So I worked hard to make sure that my husband and I were the same way. This is to say that Priscilla has heard nothing but good things about Hudson in all the years that we've been together. I love him, and he loves me. It's the same, and we know it to be a fact. So imagine my surprise when I get home today, a whole week and a half after the confrontation at the cemetery, to my husband showing me some text messages of my supposed best friend attempting to seduce him via a text message. Never have I ever heard someone trying to be seductive and insulting at the same time. But Priscilla was clearly trying to toe the line of insulting me and seducing Hudson in the multitude of texts that she barraged him with. See, Hudson did not respond to a single one, of course, but she was relentless in trying to prompt a response. I think it goes without saying that this was the last nail in the coffin for me. The nuclear option was officially on the table. And now, with Hudson's unequivocal support, I wasted no time in reaching out to him. Him being Ethan, and well, it's Priscilla's high school sweetheart, and the person that she cheated on her husband with once upon a time. I knew that just volleying accusations at her while she was accusing me of sleeping with her husband would get me nowhere. I obviously did not have proof of an affair from a decade ago, so I needed a credible witness. Fortunately, I've kept in touch with most of our graduating class that still live in town, so finding somebody who had kept in touch with Ethan after he moved away wasn't too difficult. He was more than willing to speak to me about Priscilla after I gave him a rundown of what was going on. Imagine my surprise when he tells me that he had not just slept with her at the reunion 10 years ago. They were still seeing each other to this day. So Ethan had just handed me a destructive weapon, which I seriously could not wait to use. Update number 4. I know, I ended the previous update on a bit of a cliffhanger, but I couldn't just help myself. That, and I wanted to have an actual update to write before I got into all the juicy details of Priscilla's decade-long affair. I'm happy to report that I have just that. So, to pick you up on where we left off, Ethan's shocking revelation. I tried to convince him to tell Richard the truth with me, but he was hesitant to say the least. He didn't really feel too, precious about having the affair with Priscilla, evidently. He wasn't keeping things exclusive either, but he wasn't super willing to get involved in something as messy and confronting as her husband. That changed when I showed him text messages from Priscilla to a group chat that we have with some girls from high school, detailing exactly what she really thought of him. She called him a not-so-kind selection of words. Looking at it now, she was probably just trying to throw anyone off her trail since she was seeing him still. But the point is that words were downright cruel, and Ethan thought so too. Needless to say, he was more than willing to expose Priscilla to her husband now. In fact, he was so incensed by the text that I've shown him that he told me that he would arrange to be in town that same weekend to meet with me and talk to Richard. Richard deserved to know what his wife was doing behind his back, and I deserved to have my name clear. And Priscilla deserved to face the music after everything she had done. So, I didn't feel too bad about driving Ethan and I over to Priscilla's house yesterday to confront her. Thanks to Angie, I knew that they would, they'd return from their trip and that their son was at a friend's house. Convenient enough. We happened to arrive while Priscilla was out. Richard answered the door when I rang the bell, though to my confusion, the first words out of his mouth were to ask me how my daughters were doing. Imagine my surprise when I found out that not only did he not know anything about Priscilla being accusing me of this, but he was under the impression that I had canceled the demolition because I had to look after my girls. So I asked him why he didn't contact me. But once again, apparently Priscilla had apparently told him that I would rather not be contacted, as the situation with my daughters was quite serious indeed. So, yeah, that's what I'm dealing with. Then she blocked my number on his phone without him even knowing. Well, after finding all of this out, I was more than happy to introduce Ethan, and the two of us gently informed Richard of everything his wife has been up to since she confronted me in the cemetery nearly 2 weeks prior. I told him about the watch she found, the text that she sent my husband, and finally Ethan told me about their affair. As gleeful as I've sounded throughout this post, I did not take any bit of joy in the heartbreak that I saw on Richard's face. Guys, believe me, when I say that Ethan and I were as sensitive as possible when breaking the news, as selfish as my motivations might be, Richard still deserved to know the truth regardless. Once we were done, he thanked us for telling him and for the proof that we presented. Well, he asked that we leave the rest of it to him, and that he would be in touch with me ASAP about the farm. That was yesterday, based on the text I received from him a few hours ago telling me that he and Priscilla were done, and that he would be taking a short break from the restoration of the farm, and I think it's safe to say that he spoke to her. Based on the barrage of calls and messages that I've since received from Priscilla that have all gone unanswered, by the way, it's even safer to say that she didn't like how the conversation went. I can't say that I have any regrets about how I handled things. I'll be visiting Rachel later today, a full date late and alone for the first time in a while. It's only been 2 weeks since I've been there, but so much has changed. I'll speak to her about it maybe, and I'll find myself feeling guilty, but it's unlikely. All I did, guys, was just reveal the truth. For those of you who have read along to this point, I hope that you think so too. Thank you for not only your time, but your compassion in the comments for the last couple of weeks. I think it's finally over. Final update. Clearly, I'm nothing if not long-winded. So guys, I know it's definitely been a while since my last post, nearing a year now, since I posted my final update, so recent events have me here for a final installment. Since my last post, you'll be happy to hear that Richard and Priscilla have finally divorced. Evidently, their prenup was just as ironclad as she made it sound to be, because true to her word, she's been left with nothing to her name. Custody after their son has been granted primarily to Richard, at least until Priscilla can secure a suitable living arrangement. Considering she quit her job by her own violation a couple of years ago and the agreement set in her prenup alimony, well, that's out of the question. She's well and truly on her own, and she's miserable. She has been hopping from guest room to guest room ever since being removed from Richard's house, which I'm quite sure is to delay moving back in with her mother, who she notoriously finds too controlling. Her mother is enough of a deterrent that Priscilla actually chose to turn to me before turning to her. You can go ahead and imagine my surprise when she turned up on my doorstep, after having not spoken, in months, and having her blocked on every single form of communication known to man. She was somehow under the impression that a few crocodile tears and sincere apologies, and when she told me that she forgave me for everything that I've done to her and that Rachel would want me to help her, would be enough for me to put aside everything that she had done and welcome them into my home with open arms. Guys, you'll be proud to know I shut the door in her face. Well, those last few months without her, it taught me that having her in my life was mentally and emotionally draining in a way that I never realized. I thought it would be hard to turn her away, but it turned out it was one of the easiest things I've ever done. I hope that one day she just realizes exactly what she did to deserve what's happening to her, but I don't think she ever will, honestly. And guys, I don't really care.
So some of the commenters were basically saying that OP at the end of the story should have helped out Priscilla. I do want to know your thoughts on that when OP turned her away and said, you know what, you're no longer a friend of mine, and I felt so relieved having you out of my life for all these months, and I don't want you back in it. I do want to know your thoughts about exactly what you would have done in that situation. Would you have helped your lifelong friend out and just said, you know what, I understand you were wrapped up in some things, you blamed me, we can get over this. Or do you guys think that OP made the right decision? Drop it down below in the comment section. My name is Mr. Reddito, and I narrate stories like this every single day. If you guys want to be a part of these stories, consider subscribing. I'll see you tomorrow, guys. Have a fantastic day, and of course remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.